So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to those of you who were here at IDS, where we have particularly welcome to the MA Climate class. Welcome to our team in Belém. As you just heard from Alex, they're 2 blocks away from the Belém Blue Zone, close to it. You read the news last night where the demonstrations of indigenous people were going on, demanding voice, which is what this workshop, this seminar is about. And welcome to our online audience, where we have some 100 people signed up from around the world. Particularly welcome to the group in Belém, who are meeting at the Forest House of the Climate and Land Use Alliance, CLUA, who are co-hosting this event with us. My name is John Gaventa. I'm a professor here at the Institute of Development Studies. Before I go further, let's share some logistical information. We're providing interpretation from English to Portuguese and vice versa. So the interpretation function can be found on your Zoom page under More if you don't see it. And you can go there and then choose which channel you need. In this room, we'll be broadcasting the English channel. Can you please post any comments and questions in the chat box, not the Q&A box, because then everyone online can also see them. So this week, as we all know, the eyes of the world are on the climate deliberations known as COP30, taking place in the Amazonian city of Belém. Thousands of state leaders, lobbyists, civil society representatives, indigenous leaders, and others are also there, attempting to influence their proceedings. We're all aware that the stakes of these deliberations are very high. This is the 10th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, where commitments were first made to limit the rise of greenhouse gases and minimize the growing risk of climate change. While progress has been made, recent data has shown that global temperatures continue to rise beyond the tipping point protection of our planet. Of the many important issues being addressed at the COP, one particular stream of the debate focuses on the need for a just transition. That is a fair deal for communities and workers affected by their urgently needed shift away from fossil fuels to other sources of energy, including forms of renewable energy that require ever-increasing amounts of critical minerals. While resolutions at previous COPs have highlighted the importance of just transitions, often missing from these debates have been research and voices and experiences of frontline communities themselves. These may include those who are experiencing the phasing out of coal or gas exploitation, such as in Nigeria or in Appalachia. These often leave behind huge environmental destruction and impunity for the perpetrators. But other communities face new forms of mineral extraction, be they for lithium or other critical minerals, which again threaten land loss and environmental destruction of local communities. Also absent is funding and policy attention to the specific needs of these frontline energy communities. A recent report issued last week from ActionAid focused on 2 of the largest multilateral climate funds, the Green Climate Fund and the Climate Investment Fund, which found that only 2.8% of climate finance for climate mitigation has gone to support just transitions. Even less, 1 in 50 projects were deemed to have paid adequate attention to listening to the voices of workers and communities affected by the transition. This COP has promised to be more inclusive than recent COPs, and as we speak, thousands of indigenous leaders, NGOs, and others are there making their voices heard. As a contribution towards addressing this gap in the debate, today we're also pleased to release a new special issue of the IDS Bulletin entitled Struggles for Justice in the Energy Transitions, Voices from the Front Line. The issue is open access, freely downloadable from the links to the chat, with translations in Spanish and Portuguese for some of the articles as well. The issue brings together contributions from researchers and activists working closely on issues of just transition in 10 countries across parts of Latin America, Africa, Europe, the United Kingdom, and the United States. These communities are often on the peripheries of their own countries and face multiple inequalities which must be overcome. Yet we find across them that far from experiencing the energy transition as a step towards justice, they often experience it as a continuation of long-term patterns of exclusion and injustice. At the same time, these communities have rich local cultures and knowledges which should inform current debates. Far from being passive in the midst of massive change, we found powerful stories and strategies of resistance and actions, which are being used to strengthen voices, build alliances, and construct new narratives for a just future. So please check out this free bulletin with detailed accounts of the experiences of frontline communities from around the world. So we were delighted at this launch to discover that 5 of our contributing authors to the IDS Bulletin are also this week in Belém at COP30. So for this dialogue, they are gathered near the main blue zone where the official proceedings are taking place. The Forest House where they are meeting is the headquarters of the Climate and Land Use Alliance, who have kindly offered their space and are co-hosting this event. So shortly, I will hand over to Cecília Viana of the Climate and Land Use Alliance to welcome us from Belém. Then we will go to Alex Shankland, an IDS fellow, one of the co-editors of the bulletin, who is there and will update us briefly on how these issues of voice and exclusion have already been playing out at the COP last week and this. Alex will then introduce our speakers on the panel there, who will have about 7 or 8 minutes to draw from their articles key messages for COP leaders to hear. Then we'll return here for some summary remarks from Peter Newell from the University of Sussex, who also contributed to the bulletin. And finally, we will end at the end of the presentations, we'll open up for further questions and comments. Again, please add these to the chat section. And my colleague, IDS fellow Rosie McGee, also a co-editor of the bulletin, will keep an eye on the discussion and monitor what's coming up in the chats. So many thanks again for everyone. Thanks particularly to our team in Brazil, and particularly to CLUA for hosting our session there. And Cecília, may I hand it over to you?
Thank you, John. Can you hear me well? Yes? Okay, good. So good morning, everyone here in Brazil. Good afternoon, I believe, for you and the UK. My name is Cecília Viana. I am a program officer at the CLUA Brazil team, and it's a pleasure to host this event with IDS. And so, yeah, just to share what CLUA is an alliance of 6 member foundations, one of which is Ford Foundation, who is supporting the launch of the studies and the bulletin. So it's an honor to, in the name of Ford, also welcome you for this discussion. And I think it's a very timely discussion, as everyone is talking about a just energy transition in the blue zone, right? And understanding what just means is a key to get the procedures right. So get the processes right in terms of justices and the context of the transition away from fossil fuels, so we can get the outcomes right. So there's a lot of conversation around what the outcomes that are desired, but unraveling what is actually going on the ground from real world experiences are extremely important to inform the process, because as everyone knows, the procedural justice is fundamental to achieving justice in the end, in the outcomes. So having these experiences combined in a single bulletin will be very informative for the discussions, for the negotiations, and hopefully for what is achieved in terms of justices or justice for transitioning away from fossil fuels. So with that, and welcoming everyone who just arrived here in the room, I would pass it on to Alex, and I hope everyone has a great debate, and yeah, happy to have you here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Cecilia. And thanks again to CLUA for hosting us here in the House of the Forest, where we've already had many important debates here in the context of COP30, including last night's with the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the rights of Indigenous peoples on how to strengthen recognition of the rights of local communities in climate policy processes without rowing back on the recognition already won by Indigenous peoples through their struggle over many years. So it is exceptionally timely that we're launching this IDS Bulletin with the theme of Voices from the Front Lines of Energy Transition, because not only, as Cecilia said, is just transition itself a key theme of the discussions in this current phase of COP30, but also because the process has witnessed recent important advances in official acknowledgement of the right to be heard of communities most directly impacted by the energy transition and by other key elements in the climate debate. So yesterday we celebrated the official launch of the Global Forum of Local Communities on Climate Change, which is an important step forward, recognizing a new UNFCCC caucus that seeks to channel the voices of peoples from the territories such as those whose experiences are documented in this issue of the IDS Bulletin into the often opaque and inaccessible climate policy processes. And the Brazilian presidency has shown very strong commitment to opening up these spaces. And it's also supported the most extensive participation of Indigenous peoples ever seen in UNFCCC COP. But as John said, we also witnessed direct action last night by Indigenous leaders and other social movements who don't feel this has gone far enough or fast enough. So we are at a critical juncture, which makes this even more timely. And so I'm absolutely delighted to welcome a panel composed of researchers, activists, some people who are both, and representatives of affected communities from some of the territories that feature in this edition of the IDS Bulletin. So immediately to my left, we have Juliana Peña Niño, Colombia Country Manager for the Natural Resource Governance Institute, who led the extraordinary process of dialogue around narratives, alternative narratives of transition that is captured in the bulletin in Colombia, bringing together a very diverse range of voices from many territories to produce a really inspiring set of results. To my right, we have Francisco Calafat-Faria, who is from London South Bank University, Principal Investigator of the LIQUIT project, which brought together a group of authors for another key article in this bulletin, which links the experience of communities in northern Portugal and the Covas de Barroso region impacted by lithium mining with the experience of territories in the Jequitinhonha Valley in Minas Gerais here in Brazil impacted by lithium mining. And indeed, we have with us, Lucas Martins from the Quilombola traditional Afro-Brazilian community of Córrego Narciso do Meio in the municipality of Araçuaí, and his colleague Thiago, who are here from the front line of the struggle with lithium extraction in the Jequitinhonha region. We also have Professor Klemens Leszewski from Federal University of Minas Gerais, who's a member of the LIQUIT team, Fabiana Leme, researcher from the LIQUIT team, Rebecca Minda from the LIQUIT team. So we have a strong presence here. And continuing the theme of communities engaging with the extraction of the critical minerals that play such a central role in the energy transition, we're also delighted to have with us Melania Chaponda, Director of the Shine Collab, working across communities in Southern and Eastern Africa on gender and energy transition. And Mela today is here with her colleague Karen Gonzura, and also with Gladys Meke, who is from Bikita district, where the largest lithium deposits in Zimbabwe are currently being exploited by international mining companies. So we have a really rich range of research insights, experience, and activist vision to illuminate our discussions here. So without more ado, I'd like to ask each speaker or pair of speakers just to tell us for 7 or 8 minutes the key things that emerged from the work that is captured in this IDS Bulletin and the key lessons that that you think we should be taking away for COP30 and beyond. So first, I think I will probably go, since we're in Brazil, think I'll go to Francisco first. Yes. So Francisco, if you and Lucas between you could give us 7 or 8 minutes on what LIQUIT has found and what the community's experiences in the Jequitinhonha Valley have been.
Obrigado. Eu vou falar em português. Pode ser?
So the translation is working, Francisco?
I will speak in English, in Portuguese. Can you hear me in
Está
English?
funcionando a
Yes.
tradução?
Are you able to hear the translation on audio at IDS? Yep, because Francisco will speak in Portuguese.
Não, mas então, né, temos um também. Quer que eu fale em inglês? Prefere?
Yeah, it says it's working.
Ok, então,
So,
muito obrigado pelo convite primeiro.
thank you so much for the invitation. It is such an honor to be here with you guys, being connected. What I would like to share with you is that the effort that we have been making in reducing all the damages that we have been suffering with carbon emissions make us rethink about this agenda on this article that we have wrote a couple of weeks ago. We have some researchers from LIQUIT projects that have been participating with us, assisting us in everything that we need. We are the voices of the territory, and we are very concerned about this method, which consists on calculating the extractivism consensus on energy transition. The geopolitical concept regarding lithium extraction is not proportional when it comes to having a look at what is happening really in the territories. And as it has been mentioned in our article, we have 2 examples. We are considering lands from Portugal, shared systems, distribution of water, and also this ecological conception about what is considered a patron. Yes, speak near the microphone. Thank you.
Tá bom assim?
Is it better right now?
Então, Cobos de Barroso foi considerado património agrícola mundial.
So it has been recognized as a patrimony in 2018. So as a parallel, we have been considering this outskirts in Europe, in Portugal, and we have been comparing this study with some indigenous communities that has passed through some struggles, and we have another huge project threatening the territories in other regions. So our article basically is comparing these 2 scenarios. They have different perspectives, but at the same time they are connected because it has everything to do with the post-colonial risk of climate change. They are impacted about this green mining concept, and it is kind of become acceptable for the energy transition. And this is the logic of the sacrifice, the conception that there is something bigger that is justified by the local suffering of those people who live there. If you destroy a territory, you make up for it by rebuilding something else in another territory. And it is way worse because it will produce more litter, more garbage, and it is not really something that can be recycled. So the thing is this extractivism when it comes to carbon can only be avoided if we have a biodiversity agenda that really change something. So that's why it is so important to develop this system to understand the fragmentation between scientific world and what happens in reality. These are cosmovisions that integrated, they become something that can really offer solutions to a world that is not self-destroying in a daily basis. We don't want that, and that's what we believe. To conclude, I would like to mention that the scope of our research is to have a continuous search with activists, uh, academic researchers. Everybody take part on the research, and we want to make people aware that we are all damaged by what is happening, and we consider one another all colleagues. We are all on the same place. With that, I would like to hear my dear colleague Lucas, who is going to speak now. He lives in one of these communities who are suffering with the exploitation of lithium. Good morning, guys. My name is Lucas. I live in a community in Vale do Jequitinhonha in Minas Gerais state in Brazil. We were extremely surprised by this discovery. It was back in 2019. And the community was so surprised by what happened. We had many people starting to make researches in our territory. They didn't respect us. They didn't respect the law. They invaded literally the territory, and they were trying to persuade us and to convince us that they were doing good for the planet. And people say that a part of the forest is not important for the world. And this is one of the forests that capture the highest quantity of carbon nowadays. We are located in a transition biome. We are between two areas, actually, what is recognized as Caatinga in Brazil, and the access to water is only when people get there with a truck. So this is between the mountains and the scrubland. And we have this other location called Chapada do Lagoão, which is in Minas Gerais. This has been cataloged in previous studies in our territory. So these non-government organizations, they were around us. They were passing through the process, and they were taking care of nature. But at the same time, these organizations, I mean, they found out that there were minerals there, and they started selling lands for 30 million American dollars, and these lands didn't cost a thing. And people started to attack the traditional communities, and it was horrible for us. This was a territory that people were just living there with their families. We can see some documentaries by our colleague about what is happening. So the name of the valley has changed, and it has become the Valley of the Sacrifice. We have nothing. Nothing is developed in the region. We are being sacrificed. I mean, our kids, our water, for an energy transition, for a higher good, something good for the globe, but there is no good in that. We can see pollution either sound pollution, mineral, metal, powder, all types of pollution that our ancestors never saw anything like that. There is no energy transition. There is a plan that the traditional communities will sacrifice their existence so that the world is better. And this is not true. Thank you so much.
So we're going to continue hearing about the impacts of critical mineral extraction, specifically lithium, from Mela. And yeah, will this reach? If we can get the wire to reach that far. Yeah. Okay. So Mela, over to you. 7 or 8 minutes on Shine's work, please.
Thank you very much. Our work with the communities impacted by lithium extraction shows very strong attachments to their lands and their territories. And therefore, while the communities are not fighting energy, they are against extractivism as a model of development, where there is extraction of value from their lands and their territories without the free, prior, and informed consent of the communities, and particularly women, because the work of Shine centers more on women, because we believe that as Africa is facing an energy crisis, the 600 million people in Africa living without access to the very basic energy services, the groups which are severely impacted are the women because of the care work burden, and because a lot of the women are engaged in the less formal or informal sector. And therefore, their contributions to economies, their contributions even to the energy sector is not feasible. And because of that, they continue to be extremely marginalized, particularly now when there is the global rush for critical minerals, when everywhere across the world, everyone is talking, every country, everybody is talking about the need to transition from the fossil fuels driven energy systems to renewable energy. But our concern is that the issue of justice is bit by bit disappearing from the energy transition discussions. And that justice part is where we are extremely concerned, because we are seeing how whether we can talk about the DR Congo, where there are violent conflicts in the critical minerals mining zones, or we talk about Zambia. Just recently on TV, we saw how there was the very strong community voices against their president in the Zambia Copper Belt. And we know that the real issue in the Zambia Copper Belt is because communities are losing their lands while they continue to live without access to basic energy services. And in Zimbabwe, we also find that being very prominent, where communities are holding on to their land, not because they don't believe that there is a need to harvest energy from solar, from whether they are the mini grids, the hydro, the mini hydros. But what they're actually saying is that they cannot continue carrying the burden of extraction while everybody else is enjoying energy services, yet they continue to live in energy poverty. And as well, one of the very critical issues which we need also to raise and to center is that the ideas of communities are in very much contrast with the dominant ideas around development, that when communities are holding on to their land, they are talking about intergenerational justice. They don't look at land as something that is supposed to be used now without taking into consideration the justice for the future generations. And therefore, as we were doing this work with the communities using feminist participatory action research, a lot of what was coming out is women were saying, if we would give up this land, what about our children? If we would give up this land and our rivers, what about our children? What is it that they are going to inherit? And therefore, the issue is about, people knowing that they inherited this land from their ancestors, and therefore they need to pass it on to the next generation in a condition that they inherited it from their ancestors. And so land is not just something of economic value to the communities. It is spiritual, it is social, it is cultural. And that is not taken into consideration. I haven't heard anyone who is having a discussion around energy transitions talking about that kind of value to the land. And the right to be recognized as distinct people, distinct groups of people with distinct needs that often the dominant ideas around development is the people living in the periphery or the people who are in the global south, or in a particular country, the people living in geographically marginalized communities like the rural areas are supposed to develop urban areas, or the people in the global south are supposed to develop the global north. And this is also part of what is being challenged, the development paradigm that centers the needs of the metropole. And this is what as well communities are fighting to say we need to be recognized as people who are rights holders, and that energy is not for capital, or energy is not supposed to be for production only. Energy is supposed to be a right that is supposed to be accessed by everybody. And therefore there is also the issue of as I round off, the issue of questions such as the communities living in the lithium area and the communities living in the areas where the mines are closing, because as the Shine Collab, we bring those groups together. There was also the question of, are we supposed to look at just energy transition just at this very end where the mines are closing? And are we saying that the people living in Bikita or the Zambia Copper Belt are supposed to find justice for where the mines are closing without them having justice? So we believe that justice should be on the whole value chain of the renewable energy system. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you, Mela. And so we've heard about these intense challenges faced by the territories on the front line of the expansion of critical minerals extraction, but also, as Mela has reminded us, there are also communities impacted by the closure of, if you like, old energy industries, particularly coal. And the bulletin, as I'm sure John will discuss with us, does include articles from Appalachia in the US and from the northeast of England, where the old coal economy is giving way to a not so just transition. But also there are countries in the global south which have developed pioneering experiences of building just such a dialogue across regions associated with old and new energy frontiers. And so I'd like to invite Juliana from NRGI to tell us how that process unfolded in Colombia. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you for this invitation. I'm very glad to be here. So I would like to share a bit of the work that NRGI has done over the past 2 years. We began reviewing the dominant narratives about energy transition in Colombia's public discourse. So in this work, we identified the narratives opposing progress toward a just transition that have prevailed, and that they are often promoted by powerful actors, sometimes with vested interest. So these narratives tend to reproduce existing dynamics of power, inequality, and inequity. And we also identified that civil society and local communities, women, indigenous peoples are still marginalized in this national conversation. So we decided to launch an initiative to co-create a meta-narrative for a just energy transition. And that means like a broader story that others could use to bring new perspectives to this public debate, including those of frontline communities. So this meta-narrative aims to build the foundation of a transition that prioritizes equity, participation, and well-being over extraction or profit. So we brought together around 30 people from communities, representatives, grassroots organizations, women, and indigenous groups, especially focusing on mining and oil producing regions. So for us, changing the narrative means challenging dominant stories and opening the space for new ones that reflects people's real experiences and hopes, especially those actors that live in these territories, and they are the ones who are really experiencing the consequences of the energy transition in their territories. So policy stories and collective narratives are powerful tools for social and political change, and they can bring new issues on the public agenda and help shift formal governance structures. So including those voices shape what justice means in the energy transition. So for us, that was the key point of the whole work. So these communities really understand their territories, the realities that they are living there, so they can offer concrete visions for sustainability, for restoration, coexistence with nature, and this is like a bottom-up approach of the whole process. No, so the transition becomes a process that distributes power, benefits, and responsibilities more fairly, like including these voices. So our meta-narrative, so to stay in the ground in local realities, and also trying to identify differences between these realities. So we try to get those differences, but also like trying to select the commonalities on those life experiences. So some key themes that we included in our meta-narrative are, first one, territorial justice. So avoiding new forms of extractivism and preventing regions from becoming the sacrifice zones again. Environmental protection, defending sacred lands and recognizing more than human relations and approaches. Third one, rights and governance, ensuring autonomy, free, prior, and informed consent, safe civic space, and inclusive participation. The fourth one, energy democracy, promoting community-led and locally controlled energy systems. That is a very high prioritized topic in the discussion. Environmental restoration, of course, putting regeneration and care of forest ecosystems at the center, and economic alternatives. But in this point, they said that these economic alternatives should be built in a community-based approach, so that it comes from local like context in a post-extractive economy. So what we have learned is that creating this meta-narrative empowers communities, and this process gave frontline communities participation in national conversations and visibility in policy spaces where they were previously absent. And in some regions, discussions on the transition are already there before weren't there, and in some cases are advanced, for example, in the cold region at the north of the country. And the whole process also helped to strengthen alliances between civil society, like national NGOs and local communities and local leaders. So we think that we helped a bit to strengthen like social fabric. And maybe one of the key points as well is that we created a strong emotional connection in the whole group, and the empathy and understanding of others' situation was really like a focus on our work. And the emerging messages reflect people's lived realities and personal, political, and social issues that were not visible there. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Juliana. I think there's a tremendous amount that we can all learn from the work that you've been doing in Colombia. And I think you've also picked up on some of the themes we've heard from the other speakers about avoiding the endless expansion of extractive frontiers, about valuing territories as sacred spaces and spaces of memory, as well as sites of value extraction. And I think also the theme of access to energy and the right to energy, which Mela reminded us that most of the communities in these zones of extraction are living in energy poverty. Their right to energy is not being realized. And we also, that came across very strongly in the article from Mozambique. And I think we have Cecília Pereira from the Mozambique team on Zoom as well, and he might like to chip in later. Peter, Pete Newell, over to you. Plenty for you to pick up on there, I think, including perhaps the key issue of building alliances that Juliana's highlighted there too. So yeah, over to IDS.
Thanks very much, Alex and colleagues. I have to say I'm very jealous that you're there in Belém, not in rainy, cold England. So thanks so much for the invitation to be here and to offer a few sort of thoughts and reflections. Gary, am I audible with this, or do you want to? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, it couldn't be more timely, I think, for the reasons you've outlined in terms of some of the big debates at COP around just transitions, the speed of them, the depth of them, who needs to be involved in them, who's financing them. So I think a lot of the issues that we're talking about here, you know, neatly align with the sorts of issues that are going on in the more formal negotiating spaces. I guess one thing I would say is we often talk about just transitions as if it's one thing, or we have a template or an idea of that somehow we'll know that a transition is just when we get there, and I think we don't. I think paths are made by walking. We don't yet have examples of very just, inclusive transitions, and so I think we're grappling and sort of charting our own terrain through struggle and through conflict and so on about how we square these very different dimensions of justice. Because immediately, and we can hear this from the comments that have come through already, there's different injustices or justices that are being talked about here, and they flow and relate to different types of energy systems. So we heard quite a lot about critical minerals, and then from Juliana at the end about coal. And each of these energy sources, you can argue, many people have argued, generate different types of injustices because of the materiality, if you like, of those resources and who owns them and how lootable they are, whether they lend themselves to resource curses and all these sorts of things. So there's something really important about taking the particular energy systems that we're thinking about seriously in terms of what they mean in justice terms. But also the fundamental question about transitioning to what and who gets to determine that. And that's where I think, you know, the work that Juliana and others are doing on narratives and thinking about more progressive visions is really important, because all of the actors that are there in Belém have their own vision of what a just transition looks like. If you ask the World Bank, they'll have a clear vision. If you ask the IMF, they'll have a different one. If you ask the ILO, they will have a different one again, in terms of how, you know, what's the end point, what the direction is, how it will be supported, etc. So just a few other sort of quick thoughts. One is around, we talked about the front lines of a just transition, and some of the interventions very much talked about resource frontiers and these sort of zones of extraction or sacrifice zones, as Juliana and others referred to them. But I guess other front lines are also where the decisions are made. And in a way, that's one of the key challenges I think we're facing, this fundamental disconnect between who gets to decide and who gets to finance particular energy projects and infrastructures, which is often in boardrooms or government ministries in parts of the global north or richer parts of the global south, and then who lives with the consequences. And so the question, in a way, strategically, and lots of the work I think in this bulletin shows this, is how do you close that gap? How do you build bridges and alliances and try and connect those two to hold those with power to account for the decisions they make about energy systems, which have very live and real consequences, as we've heard. And I think, partly related to the Forward project that many of us have been involved in, there's important lessons to learn from the past, because we are talking about just transitions as a new thing. But in a way, their struggles, as we heard from Mela and others, their struggles over land, livelihoods, rights to resources, compensation, rights to work. I mean, these are not new things. This is like throughout the whole history of development, frankly. But there are questions about what's different now about this particular sort of energy transition challenge that requires maybe a different set of strategies or challenges. And one of the things there, I think, is how we move across sites and scales to connect the dots between shared experiences. So just as Francisco was talking about, movements linking lithium extraction in Portugal and Brazil, or other movements connecting around coal, for example, there is the need to sort of share experiences, share strategies, mobilize and amplify the voices of actors in different spaces. And I think that's really important in trying to navigate some of these challenges and close these gaps in power between where decisions are made and where they have most effect. I guess another thing we haven't mentioned so much yet, although I think Lucas's intervention highlighted the importance of violence and intimidation and all of that in that, because sometimes when we talk about just transitions, and particularly the procedural aspect, there's a sense in which we bring more stakeholders to the table, more and more people involved in charting courses, when in large parts of the world we know that would just result in violence, intimidation and death, frankly. So there are big issues around closing civic space, populism, authoritarianism, backlash. And again, this isn't a thing about the global south. We're seeing a big right-wing backlash in this country here, as we know at the moment, against climate change, against net zero, like a weaponization of debates around energy and climate. And that's, spreading globally. So these are sort of disabling contexts, if you like, things that make it harder for groups to articulate justice claims of one sort or another. And yet, in spite of all of that, we are still seeing, as we've heard from these presentations, attempts to occupy new spaces, to open up existing spaces, to build alliances, as Juliana was saying, to construct alternative narratives. And I think all of that is hugely important. And let me just end there maybe by saying, I think ultimately what I took from several of the presentations is the need to think about challenging power and sort of construct countervailing forms of power. Because we've heard many of the presentations talked about inequities between North and South, how Northern actors are pushing costs onto Southern countries. I think Melon particularly talked about the urban-rural divide, right? That it's sort of, rural areas subsidizing effectively with their resources and their livelihoods and their lives, frankly, in some cases, urban privilege or access to energy. So there's an urban-rural dimension. There's clearly differences between capital and labour, between states and citizens, that some of these approaches, I think, are trying to tackle. So in Colombia, you have the Energy Communities programme, right, which is trying to deal with some of these issues, but perhaps it doesn't go far enough. And then just at the end, we were hearing things around generational divides and divides between humans and more than humans. So all of these are relational shifts that need to occur if we're going to really get to the bottom of some of these key challenges. It's not just about institutional tweaking or, bits of capacity building for civil society. It's a far more fundamental challenge. And not just the power relations, I think, but the things that uphold them. So the law is one thing. We didn't hear about it much in the presentations, but it's in the bulletin. Several people talked about, the limits and the potential of using the law to try and contest some of these injustices. But, dominant property regimes, many of which are colonial, and militarization, which again Lucas pointed out in his comments. These are the systems which enforce those inequities, which I guess also needs to be addressed. So just final word, I think the key thing here, and I think Alex perhaps named it in these terms, is how do we square this emerging right to energy with the right to justice and voice? What does it mean to try and pull those two things together? And of course, how you pursue that will look very different in these contexts. But just another final word of thanks to everyone for shedding important light on these issues.
Thank you so much, Pete, for a really good rounding off of a very, very rich series of presentations. It seems almost impossible that we fitted in sharing with you so much of the content of the bulletin, and we're on time, which is truly amazing. And it's great because it means that we've got a lot of time for discussion and questions and comments to the panel, and we're going to do that, take the rest of the time to do that. If people do need to leave for commitments at 2 o'clock here, please feel free to creep out, that's fine. We won't take it personally. I wanted to just say as well, so you've been having the links to each of the articles posted by our colleagues from the communications team as the speakers were talking, but also there's a policy briefing which will be produced on the basis of all of this, which will be coming out in the coming weeks. And we'll send that to everybody who registered for the event, and it will be publicised around IDS. So all of you here, physically here, should have access to that too. That's a much shorter synthesis of some of the key messages from the bulletin. So I think we've also got online some of the other authors of other articles, which are in the bulletin, which is fantastic. And at some points, they might want to come in and comment as well. I think for questions and comments, we'll go first to people in the room here. If there are questions or anybody wants to raise their hand here to contribute somehow. Then, Alex, we can move to you in case there are any questions in the room there that we could take in person. And then I'll go to the online questions and comments, which I hope are already coming up. Oh, yes, good. They're already coming up in the chat. So the floor is open. Would anybody here like to make a comment? Gary is roving with the microphone, which you'll need to use in order for the interpreters and the colleagues in Brazil to be able to hear you.
Maybe introduce yourself.
Yeah, would you like to say who you are?
Yeah. My name is Razara Maru Dieudonné. I'm from Madagascar, Africa. I study climate change development and policy at IDS Sussex. You know, many people in the global south countries, we know that we do not have access to energy. And my question is, how can global energy transition plan make sure these communities are not left behind and their voice are included in creating fair and practical solution? Thank you.
Great. So if I got that right, you're asking more about the practicalities of how we manage to ensure that these communities don't get left behind. Thank you. Do we have another question or comment at this point that we can take now as well? Or should we put that one? Let's put that one over to the panel then. Sorry, just one more. Sorry, one more here before we go to you, Alex.
Hello, nice to meet you. My name is Camila from Colombia. I'm also studying climate change. And my question is about the context of violence in the global south, where these transitions are like imposing new models in the same context. We have armed actors, we have actually actors that mobilize violence in order to make those ideas, those political ideas materialize in territory. So it's a huge problem in Colombian context.
Which obviously greatly shrinks the space for those communities to be heard. Thank you. So Alex, over to you. Would you like to field those to the panel, all or some of the panel to react to?
Thanks very much for those excellent questions. So I think, Mela, would you, since you raised the question of energy poverty, rights to energy, access to energy, would you like to respond to the question from the colleague from Madagascar? And then Juliana, do you have any thoughts about the role of violence in closing the space? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would respond to the question of the global energy transitions, ensuring that communities' voices are involved in creating fair and practical solutions. Maybe I'll first look at the challenge that the global system has been captured by the global system of accumulation, and therefore there is a need to change that global system that centers profit over people and centers capital over the needs of the people. But there is hope in the sense that if we would decolonize in the sense of a system that takes over space, the economic space, the ecological space as well, that if we would ensure that resources reach communities so that they can be able to articulate their needs, so that we can start talking about what is that. I don't want to call it alternative, because so many people, so many times we call the local economies the alternatives, yet they are the communities that are driving all the economic systems are driven by the local economies. So there is a need to surface that, to bring that to the surface, to say every place, every country in this whole world is surviving because of the contributions of women, of the working class, of the peasantry, of indigenous peoples. And therefore that acknowledgement is the starting point to come up with what is practical. Because the moment we continue having these discussions in the corridors of academic institutions, where we continue theorizing about energy transitions without involving and acknowledging the knowledge systems that people are holding as the indigenes, as the working class, as the peasantry, we won't be able to come up with solutions which work, with practical solutions which work for everybody. That is what I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mala. I noticed that we have Marta Likuku from Cabo Delgado in Mozambique online. She may want to comment on both the right to energy access challenge, but also potentially the impacts of violence, given that Cabo Delgado, which is Mozambique's major natural gas production region, has also seen terrible violence associated with that in recent years. But before that, I'll come to Juliana and ask her to reflect also on the question about civic space and violence, and how that can be.
Well, first, I think we have this Escazú agreement, which is a Latin America instrument for countries to guarantee the right of participation, access to information, but also it includes the mandate to states to protect defenders, like human rights and environmental defenders. It is an instrumental legal tool. In some countries are still like trying to make it like a domestic law. It is at different stages in Latin America, but it's always a tool that we have for the protection of leaders. And also in the case of Colombia, with these type of alliances and networks that we have promoted and that we are participated in, we have invited local communities, local leaders to these type of spaces to discuss. For example, now we are in the discussion of the strategy for the elections period, right? So we are trying to gather and develop some strategies, and they are very concerned about the security, and we are trying to develop some strategies from civil society, like national civil society organizations, so how we can support them, because they are very clear in saying that they are at the front of the violence, and they are the ones who are like facing these challenges. So for example, we have identified that if we are like disseminating some communications pieces, we don't show them and we don't put them at the front of the messages. So we are trying to develop some strategies to protect them, but also they have said that they need physical protection, and yeah, that's quite complicated. So we are in the discussions on how we can develop some collective strategies to help them to participate but not risk their integrity.
Thank you, Juliana. So we have a question from Cecília. Before we go there, I'd like to give Lucas and perhaps other colleagues from the LIQUIT project the opportunity to comment on se a questão da violência tem limitado
whether
as oportunidades
violence
para
has
levantar a voz da
been
comunidade e levar para
limiting
diferentes
the
espaços. Se
community
vocês têm algum
to
comentário a
be
respeito
in
disso.
other spaces. Do you have any comments? Well, violence in mining in our community is a bit different. It's silent. I mean, it's a violence without having people speaking. It's the lack of public policies. It's making the community feel that they are wrong, that they are against the development. That, for example, we don't have access to health, education, a good public policy. This is a way to damage our people and to tell us that we are doing something wrong, as if it was a sin. And what concerns me the most is the mental health of the elderly people, because the mining industries, I mean, one example that I could share with you is this exploitation of our territory when they state that they are just making researches, even though that we state that we have the protection, that we have the law. They invade literally our land, and they justify that by saying that they are just performing research, that they, and when the community is against, they say that the community is against development, that they don't know the new methods of life, that we don't respect the land. But it is the other way around. It is the opposite. We as people, we don't feel included, and we are not really people state that we are I mean, we are excluded from debates. They don't want to hear us. That's it. Thank you.
Slow violence of marginalization, invisibilization, denial of rights, and denial of the legitimacy of your perspectives. So we have a comment and question from Cecília. Would anyone else in the room like to make a comment? Also, Guy, and a question, yeah, and then Clemens. Okay, Cecília, Guy, Clemens.
Thank you, everyone, all the speakers.
Thanks to the MA students who joined us. They had to leave to go to another class. So thank you very much for joining us. Cecília, sorry to interrupt.
No worries. So I would like to pick up on the issue, or continue on the issue of violence, but also considering the power imbalance. I think those are two pieces of the puzzle that affect communities and leave them in a difficult position to challenge what is going on in the territories. So I would like to pose a question for the collective that is here, on what, or is there anything to be learned from the labor movement to deal with those type of threats? Because the labor movement builds on the collective, right? To challenge the power imbalance and to deal with cooptation or different forms of violence. So I think it's more an invitation for a reflection on what is there to learn, and considering what the colleague mentioned of the dispersion and how the issue of scale is a challenge, because we're talking about experiences throughout the world in different contexts. So is there anything that we can be that we can foster in terms of collectivity and building on the labor movement? So yeah, thank you.
Cecília. So we have Guy and then Clemens. I think Clemens, you might need to move because the cable's not long enough.
Thanks very much, Guy Edwards, University of Sussex, PhD student. Juliana, I had a couple of quick questions for you, if I may. The first one, thinking about President Petro, he's been very outspoken about the need for an energy transition. So I was kind of curious whether his kind of speeches and his attention on this issue had opened space for the meta-narrative and this alternative narratives, whether it had kind of helped or whether it had actually kind of perhaps undermined them. So I was kind of curious which of the two it might be, or perhaps a kind of mixture. And the second question, the activities to disseminate the meta-narrative and the alternative narratives. I was just curious kind of how you guys were kind of going about this through conventional media, kind of national newspapers, or social media, given most folks get their news off kind of TikTok these days, or indeed TV and radio. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Tuna. I only know about the resistance of the labor movements. I think Marbe could tell a lot about this, and also there are, of course, several strategies in Brazil. Many different forms of resistance. It's not only the laborers, it's the local communities, the traditional people, which have a different fight than the classical labor movements. They are fighting for their territories. This is very important to stress it. And that's an issue which we try from the network of territories environment to bring here in the climate conference, that we are somehow the discussion of climate, of CO2, carbon neutrality, energy transition went off of the underlying topics which are more important than only to combat the reduction of CO2. It is, in fact, the environment and territories. Territories which are not the nation states, the political limits. It is a space of living of people, it's a space of culture, which has been expressed very well by all the participants here, which are threatened. And therefore, these new solutions proposed for energy transition, that's it, lithium. It's for batteries. The battery will not solve the problem of climate change, the battery of a car. And we have to see the whole car. And we have to see that energy transition means the fostering of all kind of mining, which already exist, and you are finding new products for mining, the rare earth and everything. And we have really a territorial assault in Brazil, I think also in Africa, to get this new raw material. So we try to discuss or bring to this climate conference that we are not discussing simply climate justice. We have to think about territorial justice. And then we are coming to the basics of the problem. It's colonization. It's an old colonization with a new rope, which means sustainability. But in fact, we are the certain form somehow not seeing anymore that we need territories for this kind of development, clean development, which is still threatening the local communities like 500 years ago. So this is a main message we will try to bring here to the climate conference, that this kind of energy transition and decarbonization, which is proposed here and discussed with the governments, is creating victim territories. I found it very interesting in Colombia that you have now in the legislation the territory as a victim. We are not speaking about zones. We are not speaking about sacrifice. Nobody does a sacrifice. We have people which are assaulting the territories, pillage, and creating victims. The local people are not doing a sacrifice for the global north. And the global north is not doing any sacrifice. They're only taking the new territories. And that's what I think it's very interesting in Colombia, to use this territory in the legislation. Territory is a space of living, that it can be dealt with within the justice system. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alex, I think you've got one more. You wanted to go to Clements, and then we've got several online. So if you could hand back to
You
me.
have some online, yeah. So I'll just ask if Francisco had any thoughts on that, but also on the labour movement point that was raised by Cecilia. Then I'll come back to Juliana to respond to Guy, and then we'll go online. And then we may hear from John and others on the labour movement question as well, because I think there's other experiences. I don't know if Philip or Hilary are online as well, but there's obviously interesting material in the bulletin on that too.
Yeah, want to come to them at the end in case they've got anything to contribute.
Just a very quick mention before I answer Cecilia's point, is that we have here two other. I said that the article was written at 12 hands, and 6 of them are here. Clemens, who just spoke, is one of them, or 2 of them, and Fabiana, Leme, the other. And then Romulo is not here because he's speaking at another event. And then there's Bruna and Aline Weber. And in relation to the labor movement, I think when we think about labor movement, we think about shop floor wage labor. And when we think about local indigenous communities, we think about them as guardians of ecologies, people who are there defending the territory against some form of production that is coming. But we don't think of them as producers often enough. And they are producers. They produce landscapes in a particular way, and they produce food, and they have their local economies. And I think that, I mean, we engage with the Union of Rural Workers in Araçuaí. There's one of the groups that we kind of engage with. But I mean, I think there's a lot to think about local communities as producers and workers as labor. And these territories are territories of life and labor. We mentioned that, right?
Thank you, Francisco. Okay, Juliana, thoughts on Guy's questions, both about President Petro, but also about dissemination and sharing of the messages from the meta-narrative project?
Well, the first thing is that we need to acknowledge that the energy transition agenda in the country didn't start with Petro's government. So it started with, Duque and also Juan Manuel Santos back from like many years ago. So they have produced public policies around enhancing renewables energies. And so we were in the track of energy transition. But it is clear that Petro positioned the justice and equity issues around energy transition. And that was key for opening spaces and discussions about what justice means and what is this about. So it definitely, for us, was like a key from this government in positioning this discussion. But nowadays, as I mentioned, we are like with different civil society organizations preparing our strategy for elections. Now we see this as a problem because it is the just energy transition term now is very linked to Petro. So now it seems like Petro's agenda and not the country's agenda or not the citizens' agenda. So we were discussing, okay, how we can do to keep the discussion, but trying to depoliticize the term, because we try to, or we struggle to position this discussion, and now we are like facing these challenges about how to be far from the current government, but also like trying to position the discussion with candidates and other type of political actors. And in terms of dissemination, we are in the process. Yeah, this is still a work in progress. But what we have done is like partnering with some local organizations and take specific pieces of the meta-narrative for them to work with strategic communications and disseminate at local or regional level. And nowadays, for this context of elections, we are using the key messages of the meta-narrative to like form an agenda with key messages that all other civil society organizations and local communities can disseminate and can use as part of the proposals that we want to present. So we are like working on that, but still we haven't reached mainstream media, and that's like the next step that we need to do, which is not easy, but the aim is to look for different voices, like territorial voices or other type of voices that are not like consulted by this mainstream media, and try to connect them and position these alternative narratives in those.
Thank you very much indeed, Juliana. So Rosie, back to you and to the online questions and any other contributors also who are in the room or online. Thank you.
Thank you very much for such rich responses, everyone. I'd like to come to Marta Likuku, who is a Mozambican colleague who I think is, I'm not sure if she's there in Belém, but has been working in Cabo Delgado, Mozambique. Marta, you've put a couple of comments in the chat, but I thought you might also want to pick up, if you could just perhaps make some brief reactions to some of the key questions or comments that you heard there that feel particularly relevant to you. So we can give you a couple of minutes to do that. And then Anabel Marin, who's another of our contributing writers who is present online. Anabel, you put a comment and a question in, so we could come to you after that. And then we have 3 online questions, which I'll read out after that, and perhaps we can direct them to individuals on the panel. Is that okay? So Marta, let's go to you if you're still online, and if you would like to either voice the comments that you put in the chat or come back on some of the questions that have been raised already from your Mozambican perspective. Marta? Not further down, Marta. Marta Likuku with an N. Oh, she's gone. Well, maybe Crescencio. Marta has gone offline, but Crescencio, you're still online. Perhaps you would be able to respond to 1 or 2 of the issues. Crescencio with D.
Pereira, no?
Yeah, it's the one at the top at the moment.
Yeah, Chris Pereira.
Chris. Yeah, that. Crescencio, you still with us? Okay, let's go to Annabelle. Meanwhile, Crescencio, if you are there and you want to chip in, please put a message in the chat. But let's go to Annabelle for your comment.
Boa.
Oh, Crescencio, that was...
My apologies. I was having an audio issue, but I mean, I guess Marta is disconnected, but I can react to some issues. Maybe I could talk a bit more about our context, our contribution regarding engagement towards our local communities. So this text prepared with Alex and Euclides. Alex is there in Belém. How nice to see him there. I greet you. So everything is based on 3 aspects of our research, with the civil society, young people, women, local authorities, between the provinces, among provinces actually. So in this article, the message maybe that we would like to share with you is aimed at reacting to the fact that a fair transition should prioritize people who are really in the front line of energy transition and the real vulnerability in climate change, those who suffer with the changes in our weather, climate. And we should explain that the communities, they are not marginalized communities. They really are the ones who are going to help us have a real energy transition. And in our text, we have exploited different subjects It has everything to do with the real justice, social inclusion, especially where Marta lives. She's one of the colleagues who had to be disconnected, but it is a region that they have huge projects of natural gas exploitation, and at the same time they have horrible conflicts with guns, violence, terrorists. Al-Shabaab is the name of the movement, Al-Shabaab, and they exploit lands, they provoke tension among the community, and they don't really take part on the decision-making process. They don't get benefited of this theorized energy transition. So there is a real need of investment, infrastructure, decentralized networks on renewable energy, solar, hydric in the central area of the country, where we have a hydroelectric company there. So the idea is to provide what is really needed by the community. So if we don't pay attention at them in this other dimension to make sure that the sub-existence means are there and understand what they really are looking for, we will not have any energy transition. We will just be reproducing logics from the past that will benefit enterprises and the dominant elite in this area. So this is another dimension that I would like to share with you regarding enterprises, and that should be we should pay attention to that. This is real social responsibility, and it has everything to do with this transparency models. So basically our article demonstrates that the state, the companies need to make sure that the mechanisms of redistributions are there for the local communities. And another component that has to do with the impact.
I think we'll need to ask you to wind up the question now, because we've got several more to respond to. So perhaps we could stop there. Thank you very much for that contribution, and it's great to hear someone speaking for the Mozambique experience. Annabelle, would you like to come in? Please keep it brief if you can, because we've got several questions queuing up online, but you could come in to voice your question.
Okay, just very briefly. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so Annabelle Marin, originally from Argentina, but now based in the UK, IDS. Just a reflection, try to explain it briefly. Given the kind of work we do, I was wondering whether the present context, moving more and more towards security and defense and so on, if this should lead us to rethink a little bit to whom we speak and our strategy, thinking in the community concerned about issues of justice, both academic and activists. So just to, I would like to know what we think in general implies for us the changing context, and if it should lead us to rethink a little bit about our strategies, to whom we speak, the kind of actions that we should take, given that things are moving so fast in the direction of issues of security, self-sufficiency, militarization, and so on.
Thank you very much, Annabelle. So I think there's 3 online questions which I'm going to state now, and then hand over to you, Alex, to perhaps invite just a couple of your panelists there to respond to all or any of the above. There might not be time to cover absolutely everything. So we've got one question online, which is about colonial aid dynamics. There's a similar issue which comes up in 2 questions from the same contributor. One is, when alliances span north-south, urban, rural, indigenous state actors, how do you prevent the reproduction of colonial aid dynamics? For example, Global North as savior and Global South as beneficiary. And then a further question about that, which is along the lines of, if alliances are claiming to be really inclusive, how can they truly manage to confront the colonial residues that would tend to appear in those kinds of international alliances? A second question is asking, is this really an energy transition? Does it make sense to continue talking about it as a transition if companies and governments are continuing to extract ever more fossil fuels? And a third one is from our colleague Sam Hickey at the University of Manchester, who raises the question whether mainstream theorizing around just transitions, such as from Macaulay and Heffron, which seems to be influencing national level policy responses at present, can properly capture some of the issues raised here, or whether alternative thinking, better aligned to social movement framing and practices, is required. And I'm tempted to say read the bulletin, but I think all of the content of the seminar very much speaks to that alternative social movement framing. But if any of the panel want to respond on that, great. If there were any time left after that, we have several of our other contributors online. We have Philip, we have Jake, I think is still there. And if there were any time at the end, perhaps one of them could come back. And I think, Pete, you might specifically want to respond on the alliances issue. Alex, over to you for a couple of...
Great. Thank you, Rosie, and thanks everyone for those excellent questions. I think I'm going to go to Mela and ask you to speak, perhaps if you can, both to any emerging dynamics around securitization, militarization, the way that critical minerals for the energy transition are increasingly actually critical minerals for the defense and security industry, if that's appearing in your work, but also if you can speak to how to avoid colonial savior dynamics in North-South alliances around these issues. Thank
you. The way I see these two questions, which are appearing like two questions, yet it's one question. Because when we look at colonialism, it's not a system that operates in isolation from other systems of oppression. And this is why the Shine Collab, and as an individual and an ecological feminist, we challenge a system that is colonial, that is patriarchal, that is violent to peoples and ecosystems, because we do not see the violence on people or on peoples as separate from the violence on the ecosystems. And that system is what is extremely colonial, because the system that is colonial, colonialism is structural violence. It is violence that is perfected in systems, in the structure, but if it was just operating in isolation from other systems of oppression, it was not going to survive until today. And therefore, we also look at how even the ideologies, the knowledge systems are extremely, extremely violent to indigenous people. The violence on the indigenous people's knowledge systems, on their cultures, on their identities, how the energy transitions are threatening, the dominant ideas around energy transitions are threatening the identities of indigenous people. They are threatening the sacredness of the indigenous people's lands and territories. And this is what we are challenging. And this is what is extremely colonial, that colonialism is no longer a system where we're talking about the occupation of another country by another country, but it is also perfected in ideas where the indigenous people in the US, for example, are facing the same violence, the same militarization, just as what is happening in countries in the global South, that it is no longer a geographical divide, but it is a divide between who is the most vulnerable in the communities, and those are considered the people that are supposed to give their everything so that the most powerful can thrive. And therefore, militarization, securitization, it is a weapon, the same as the dominant ideologies around development. And this is why we are seeing across the world, people are fighting against development, but not because they don't want development, but the development is extremely violent on women's bodies, on the bodies of the working class as well, and on the ecosystems. And this is why people are fighting, because that development is extremely colonial. I think that's what I can say for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mela, for the powerful reminder of how interconnected these systemic issues are. Francisco, you had a brief comment on dynamics of extraction, and then we'll go back to the room, I think, for responses to Sam on theorizing from below and whether social movement-led insights can take us beyond mainstream thinking on transition.
Couple of telegraphic comments about alliances. Center-periphery alliances can happen within Global North and Global South. What the Portuguese resistance lithium mining show is that the urban-rural alliance is really important, and it's a center-periphery analysis beyond the Global North, Global South. The second thing is about, I don't know who, I didn't get the name of the person who asked about if we should continue to speak about energy transitions. You will notice that our title talks about energy expansion, and we see the numbers are very clear. We're seeing an energy expansion of consumption and production. New technologies are added. More than being added, they are increasing the demand of old technologies. So that is clear. But what these works show in this special issue is how that is materially manifested in an expansion on the territories. We see a territorial expansion of this process, which clearly shows that we are not on a path to transition. And transition means many different things for many different people, but it needs to be materialized. And what we see on the ground is an expansion.
Thank you, Francisco. And thank you very much also to Juliana, to Lucas, to all our contributors in the room. And now back to IDS.
Skipped the question from Sam Hickey because he also said in his comments that he was already starting to read the bulletin, so we'll let him continue to read the bulletin. So over to you, Pete. You were going to pick up on the
there's a couple of questions actually. One was the question which we haven't yet faced: is it really a transition? And I think that's a really important point. I think in lots of ways what we're seeing is renewable energy adding to the energy mix, but not currently displacing fossil fuels. So this is a really important point. We really need an approach which leaves increasing amounts of fossil fuels in the ground. And as you know, Colombia and others are there pushing for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. But there are other approaches to trying to do the same thing. So at the moment where, energy sources are being added to the energy mix, but not really displacing the core problem from a climate point of view, at least, which is dependence on fossil fuels. But I wanted to come back to one of the earlier questions as well, which was around access. Where's the question of access to energy in all of this? Because it's also related, because you see what I'm observing is that fossil fuel industries increasingly recognize they're losing the argument around climate change, but they're claiming that meeting the energy poverty needs of the world's population will still require huge amounts of fossil fuels. And yet, so we have to ask questions about who and what the energy is for. And as I think our presentations have shown, in many cases, it's energy for industry, energy for mining, or as Annabelle just reminded us, energy for military. And it's often not for meeting poorer people's needs. And we constantly need to fight that battle and shift the narrative, as Juliana would say.
Thank you so much, everyone. A huge round of applause for our panel, and thanks for all the efforts that you made to get there and for sparing time. And thank you to all of our comms colleagues who have made a really good job of supporting this complex bilocating event. And we wish you all the best for the remainder of your time in Belém, colleagues. Thank you very much. Oh, and the interpreters as well, who've done a brilliant job. Fantastic job by the interpreters. Muito obrigado. Muchas gracias a todos. Great.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Have a great time in Belém.